thank you, Dirk, for being here tonight. Hello, everyone. My name is Patrick Fallon. I am one of the NPPA board representatives. I've been on the board the last couple of years now. I am a freelance I was a freelance photojournalist in Los Angeles for many, many years. I'm now a staff photojournalist for Agence France Presse, the wire service. And I'm really glad to be here today to welcome Dirk. And we'd like to thank him for taking the time to talk to us about codecs and just help drill into some interesting technical details that hopefully our members here will find beneficial. Just a little bit about Dirk. For those who haven't had the opportunity to meet him, this is actually my first time really interacting with him today in depth. I've known many of his CPS colleagues over the year, and they've always been amazing and very helpful. So Dirk is a field representative working with the professional Canon cinema, video, and professional still products. Prior to his joining of Canon, he was a department chairman and faculty at the Harrington College of Design in Chicago for 12 years. So he also has that educational background, which is clearly very helpful for this series. That program was focused specifically on commercial aspects of photography. Before moving to Harrington, he was a staff photographer at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago for 5 years. So the nice blend there of technical, real-world experience and educational background. So thank you so much, Dirk. A little bit more about him. He holds an MFA in independent filmmaking from the Governor State University and a BA from Brooks Institute of Photography. His book, Digital Photography Lighting for Dummies, was published by Wiley Publishing in 2010 and is still widely available. In addition to photography and filmmaking, he is an avid builder of large format and panoramic cameras, grills year-round, and shoots a compound bow. He lives in Chicago with his wife and 2 teenage boys. Dirk's work can be viewed at dirkfletcher.com or on Instagram at dirkfletcher. So, Dirk, thank you so much for being here. Sure. Really appreciate it. I know myself and the other members of the board really value the time that you have given to this series and to the organization, and hopefully our members find this to be a beneficial resource today and in the future as well.
One of the cool things, and you mentioned it, that we do, we do a lot of programming for professional users, training and stuff. But I really enjoy doing these programs for NPPA. I mentioned this on the first one I did. I'm a second-generation photographer. My dad is a retired photographer in St. Louis. And I grew up in, I want to say as far back as middle school and into high school going to the NPPA flying short course. They would go every year. It was I want to say we went to Cleveland one year. And then I think it was, I'm not mistaken, it was Columbus, Ohio, but they would go to a regional city and just for the weekend. I remember getting to meet Eli Reed at one of those. And so, when the opportunity came up to work with NPPA, I was really excited to kind of continue to the whole process. So as Patrick said, we're going to talk about color space and some codecs and color space, but my goal is to make it not really academic. We're all users, and I really want you guys to be able to just come out of here with a little more confidence on how to set your camera. You're doing video. We're going to talk a lot about the video cameras, but I know a lot of people are doing video on DSLRs as well, and this all it's all the same on it all works together on how what settings to use and when to use what settings and that sort of thing. So if you do have questions, I think Stingray will be on the whole time. If you want to just, I don't know what you want to do, Stingray. Do you want to have him?
Yeah. So you guys can go ahead and what you can do is just go into chat or the Q&A panel. Either or works perfect for me, and I'll be fielding those questions and asking them. And if we don't get around to one, we'll definitely tack it on to the end. So yeah, go ahead in the chat or the Q&A, whichever one works best for you.
Cool. All right, so with that in mind, I'm gonna go ahead and take over the screen. I'm gonna start with, we're gonna just go through, and like I said, I'm really hoping this doesn't turn into a crusty, here's a 60-page Color space PowerPoint. But first, before we do anything, let's really define when you look at a file and you're trying to decide what it is, let's go through and quickly just define what these numbers mean. And then we're going to go into some use case. I've got some examples I'm going to show you. And then I've got some kind of some tricks and stuff if you're using Canon gear and stuff to look for if you're not using Canon gear that you can still apply to pretty much anything you're using. So very first, when you see the file settings, the first set of numbers is just the resolution. It is literally how many pixels across the file you're getting. So most cameras today will at least be HD. 2K, let me go back real quick. So 2K, and then 4K, and then going into SDI, they're both flavors of HD. So right now, HD is 1920 by 1080. When you go into full 2K, that's just the DCI measurement. So the top to bottom is the same. It's the same 1080, but you're getting a little more on the sides. And really, the standard HD and 3800 4K is what you're looking at on YouTube. On most broadcast is that format, 16 by 9 format. You go out to either the 2K or the SDI, or I'm sorry, DCI size, and that's really designed for theater. Now, granted, some people will shoot everything, they'll master, they just want the biggest file as possible, but most cameras that will do HD will also do 2K, and the same when you go into UHD and then DCI. So UHD, a little more so on the 4K side, they'll say 4K, and that really could be DCI or UHD. Like I said, DCI is for the most part just used for a theater release, but that doesn't mean that people aren't going to use just to get the biggest file possible. And again, you're just going from a 16 by 9 file to 17 by 9, so you're going a little bit wider for use in the theaters. Next over is RGB. That's the actual color space, the definition of what color space you're using. And for the most part, most of what we're doing is an RGB world. And what they do, or what's done, is that's broken into Luma, which is the brightness, and Chroma, which is color. And when you're capturing in RGB, like I said, most DSLRs, most video cameras, camcorders, and live cameras will be capturing in RGB. And it's capturing, each pixel that's being recorded has a measurement for brightness and color together. If you go to YCC, there's a bunch of different acronyms for this. YCRCB. The YCRCB is really short for the CR and the CB are the chroma, the color aspect. So Luma is, again, that's just the brightness, the overall brightness of what you're capturing, of the scene you're capturing. Well, where Chroma is the color, and those are captured separately. And the reason they're doing that is Luma is in the green channel. And I'm going to show you some slides in a second, but that green channel our eyes are more sensitive to brightness. So the green channel, there's twice as many green pixels that are captured on the sensor as there are red and blue. So by separating out the Luma and the Chroma, you can then keep 100% of the Luma and you can compress the Chroma down a little bit, and you can get a little bit smaller file, which is good, especially for a lot of house of worship. They'll do live streaming, businesses, kind of post-COVID world. A lot of people they're trying to get as little files as possible. And it's a way to kind of add a little more compression to the file, because you're stripping out, you're not recording the Luma channel on every single pixel that's being recorded. And I'll show you, you'll see that in a second in the slides. Chroma sampling. This is probably chroma and bit depth are the two biggest areas that are going to that you're going to be able to see in your files when you go out and shoot, or if you go do a shootout. And depending on what you're shooting, the 422, 420, or 444 are really the hot kind of the hot button specs on cameras. What that really means is, I do have a couple slides we have to read just to make sense before we get to it. But the first number, that 422, it's either going to be 444, 422, or 420. But the 4 is referring to the number of pixels. So it's a block of 4 pixels that we're going to look at. We're going to read the color and the tonality on that and make a recording on that. And that's what is going to be used in determining the color of the file. The 2 numbers after it, the 44, the 22, or the 20, are the chroma colors. So they're both, it's a percentage of the first one. And so 422 is half the chroma or color information of a 444 file. So that goes without saying that it's not going to be exactly half the size when you're measuring how much data you're going to be able to fit on an SD card or a CF card or CFast Express, but 422 is a much smaller file than a 444. Same thing goes with 420 because you're only recording a quarter of that data. So it's getting much smaller. The downside is you're recording less data. So depending on what you're shooting, if you're doing stuff with lots of gradations, color skies, sunset, sunrise, kind of blue night skies, that's where you're really going to see it in files where there's really smooth gradations from light to dark, middle to high, that's where really making a compromise on the chroma sampling is going to really show itself. So this is a look at, this would be 2 groups of pixels, 2 groups of the 4. So we're looking at a 444 file. So each one of these pixels, we are getting a color and a recording of the color or the tonality hitting the pixel. When you go to 422, it starts blocking those together. So you're getting half of the data because it's starting to lump those 2, 2 are going into 1 all the way around. Not as bad as 420, where it's going to take and take the color fidelity. And if you're right on, if those 4 pixels are, dark and a little bit lighter and dark, it's going to make an average of those 4. So that's where you start on a 420, where you'll really start seeing almost like a stepping in a sky or something. I'm going to go in the next slide on you'll see I've got something that kind of shows how, but where you'll see that 420 where the file really starts falling apart. Like I said, it's mostly going to be in smooth gradations, skies. If you're doing architecture and you've got light on wall that's gradating across, that's where it's really going to show up in banding. And you can see that too when you're doing post-processing. You can have a 444 file that you're doing your grading, you're doing some color work on, and you may start compressing it too much and you start getting banding because you're doing the exact same thing as going from there where each group has it's basically 4 times as much information down to a quarter of the amount of color information. And then the next one, along with the chroma subsample bit depth, like I said, these are the 2 that are going to really give you the most amount of change or differentiation in the files. Bit depth refers literally to how many physical colors we're able to record. So if you're a painter and you love these graphics I stole from the internet, these are how many colors of paint you've got access to. In the red world, you've got 256 colors that you can make a painting out of, or a photograph out of, or a piece of or video clip out of. In a 10-bit world, you've just quadrupled that. So you go from essentially 250 up to about 1,000 colors. So you've just gone up 4 times going into a 10-bit file. And that's where you really, that's the 10-bit file is kind of the, I don't want to say the norm, but that's what most people want. That's the perfect compromise between going to a 12-bit file, which gives you a lot more information, and back to that 8-bit file, which is really giving you limited stuff. But depending on, not unlike, really, if you look at Ansel Adams, what he did with his own system is he tested his paper first. He determined how much dynamic range he can get out of a sheet of paper, And then he figured out a way to either expand or contract his film to match that piece of paper. So you have the ability to do the same thing with the color file. If you are shooting video and you know it's going to end up on, everything you do is going to be streaming on, YouTube. You're doing YouTube Live, you're doing Facebook Live, you're doing event. In Chicago, there's a lot of corporate, kind of branded corporate content that's done, where it's done, your professional photographers or video people are shooting it, but it's not high-end stuff. They may be, if Boeing is giving a ton of money to something, they'll do a little 20-second thing on Instagram, like, here we are, here's Boeing, we love the community, we're giving all this money, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be quick. 8-bit is fine. So a lot of it depends on, it's easy to get caught up in these specs and go, I've got to have 12-bit 444 files. Well, this is what feature films are made with. I often joke that when people are looking at cameras, definitely before the R5 came out, that's an 8K camera. So for years, we were late. We only had a 4K camera. People would be like, when are you getting 6K, 8K? And my response was always, have you seen Blade Runner in a movie theater? That was shot, that wasn't even 4K. That was like 3.7 with the Arri. But it was a 12-bit file, which gave you all of that color fidelity, gorgeous color. So a lot of it, like I said, it's easy to get caught up in what you need, but guys that are doing stuff for print or web only, you'll find that a lot of them are turning 8-bit, and that is more than enough for what they're doing, because it's giving you a lean file. With computers and iPads getting so good, you're able to edit, you're able to spit out wirelessly transfer a raw file onto an iPad, do a little bit of work and pass it on. Again, it's a great, technology's come to a point where imaging has really, it's put a lot of power into the hands of photographers. So a lot of it though, it's easy to get carried away and just test. I mean, I went to Brooks, I graduated in 92. Before it was bought and all the weird stuff happened. And they would they pretty much just beat into you testing stuff over and over and over again. So you know where your materials are and what you really need to produce something. These are the files that maybe should have been up a little bit with the 8-bit, but it really gives you an idea of the stair step and the 10-bit, just in how smooth and what the gradations and what you're sacrificing. The 8-bit is probably a little bit, it's not that graphic, going from 8-bit to 10-bit, but it is a pretty radical difference. And like I said, really, if you're out shooting sunsets, that's the first place that you'll notice it. Or not even sunsets, but blue skies. If you without a polarizer, that's where you'll really start seeing where you just have a wide area with smooth tonality that's going from light to dark. That's where the files will start falling apart. So we've got this amount of data we can capture, and this is generic. I work for Canon, but I'm a nerd. I build cameras. I love the technology of it. So this is applicable to anything. We're going to talk about Canon Log 2, Canon Log 3, but whatever you're shooting, they've got comparable log formats, log algorithms. So basically, a log algorithm, and unfortunately, I've met people that were confusing log and raw, and there's a huge difference between the two, but they thought they were kind of interchangeable. So what log does, it's a logarithmic gamma curve designed to achieve very wide dynamic range and be compatible with cinema production workflows. So I even want to take out the end of the cinema production workflows, because what all log does, and I couldn't find a decent picture of a logarithmic gamma curve, because I suspect, because I'm talking to a group of photographers, that we all don't do real well in math. I took pre-algebra twice, I took algebra twice. Math is not my forte, but we can see things, it makes sense. So if like I said, I couldn't find a decent comparison of the curves, but a non-log file, the camera gives you literally, it's a straight curve. It's from, if you're looking at a graph, bottom left to top right, it's straight. Where the logarithmic curve it humps it up towards, from the bottom to put more detail down into the black area. And I've got examples that I'll show you coming up. But what is a log curve? It's a gamma curve. So gamma just refers to light. So it redistributes the code value for the exposure it captures. So not unlike, I'm pulling it all back to Ansel Adams here. Not unlike the zone system, all log does, or a log curve, and you can make your own curve too. This is not, you're not, specifically relegated to using a Canon log file. You can, if you're really geeky, you can get in, and a lot of TV stations will do this, where they may have Sony cameras in studio and JVC cameras on location, where they can get in and actually change the knee and the curve of the cameras to match each other. So it's taking and it's redistributing the colors that come out. So the pixel gets activated, the recording is made. It's either one of 256 numbers, one of 1,000 numbers, or one of 4,000 numbers, but every pixel gets a number, gets a numeric number that is a color, it represents both a color and a brightness value. So what we're doing is, if it's a super flat day, all the zone system does, it says, well, if there's 4 stops between dark and bright, and your paper can hold 8 stops, we can stretch that out. We can give you more color, more tonality, not more color, but more tonality in between black, and white. And it really is defending or protecting the deep shadows and highlights. One of the things the older people on here that came from the film world know, that when you're shooting transparency film at every cost, you have to protect highlights. If you've got a bald guy with a light behind him, once you blow out the detail in a transparency in a slide, that's gone. You can't recover it. Opposite if you're shooting a negative, where you can print through and you can record, you can keep getting the highlight data back. So you record for the shadows. So a digital file is more, you need to expose a digital file more like a E6 or transparency, given that once those highlights are gone, they're gone, but you can go back in and you can dig out the detail in the shadows. And then also, before we move on, know that because you're shooting in a log environment doesn't mean you end up with a log looking image. One of the best examples that I like to talk about is, if you've watched Mr. Robot and you've watched Stranger Things, both were shot with Arri, both were shot with Leica lenses, but they have drastically different look. Mr. Robot actually looks like a log file that hasn't had a whole lot done to it. It's very, there's not a lot of highlights. There's detail in the shadow. It's dark. It's kind of green looking and it's moody, where Stranger Things looks 80s. It's bright colors, contrast. It really, it's just the look that how you go in and what you want to use, how you use the tools to achieve the look. Same camera, same lenses, 2 drastically different looks. So when should you use log? If you have time to do some post-production. I'm gonna show you some LUTs and how LUTs work as well. But if you're doing something that you're gonna turn and it's gonna post, if an airplane fell out of the sky and you're shooting news, you're not gonna shoot log, you're gonna shoot using in-camera setting. So the footage that comes out, you can pull it out and it's ready to go. If you're doing any high contrast scenes, log will definitely help you retain both shadow and highlight detail. And it gives you just a bigger palette to look at. Like I said, if you think about that Mr. Robot, Stranger Things comparison, they both started with a file that looked much more like Mr. Robot, but because they had detail in the shadows, the skies weren't blown out, they had detail in the table, under the table, in the shadows. In post, you can determine if you want to push those and blow the highlights out, let the sky go past Dmax, or kind of crushing the blacks is the term, where you're okay losing tonality in the blacks. You just want a crispy. I like, probably because I'm a product of the 80s and I shot a lot of Velvia, but I like color, I like contrast. I'm not a huge fan of the kind of log look that a lot of anything dark and moody seems to be synonymous with, like a log look that's kind of a gray, it's nice because it has a lot of tonality in it, but it's definitely a unique look. So when should you not use log? When quick turnaround of footage is necessary. And definitely if you're doing anything where you're using the camera in a live setting, there's a lot more emphasis these days on using, I hate the phrase, but like cinematic live events where there may be, using a large format sensor where you might have been before just a 2/3 like a broadcast camera. So you see NFL Films switch to all Alexa, which is Super 35, a larger sensor because it gives you more control over depth of field. You see a lot of the high-end super churches are a huge buyer of these massive live systems, live switches, where they may have, Canon sells into a lot of these where there may be 3 or 4 cameras throughout the sanctuary, all with large sensor, so you can have a less live TV look and more of a cinematic look. And when you're doing that, you're going to send just a straight signal out, and the cameras are generally painted back at the switch, so they can, if you're doing sports, they'll color the cameras in the truck. If you're doing if it's like a church or a venue that broadcasts live on a regular basis and you've got control room, they'll control the color in that area, but you're not going to send like a log or LUTed signal in that point. So Canon, and this is where it'll differ on different manufacturers, but Canon logs are like this, the original log curve, and this is true in if you're using the 5D with the log added to it, the original R internal, and then the C100, the C300, the C500 original cameras, and then the new C100 Mark II will do it, but it's a 12-stop log curve, and this is based on an 8-bit sensor. So that's why a lot of the still cameras, especially the early ones that were doing that, you were able to add a LUT to, or they were able to shoot in log, only had the original Canon log. So when you go into log 2, I'll pull 2 and 3 up together. So log 2 and log 3 are, log 2 is the LUT that will give you, or the curve that will give you the most amount of dynamic range out of any of our cameras. So it's going to give you the most amount of detail down in the shadows, most amount of highlight protection, but none of the log files. One of the reasons why it's not a great idea to use log if you're not planning on, if you don't have time to come back and do a color grading and do some work in post, because the files will, we don't hit them with a lot of noise correction. So that even though we're seeing into 16.5 stops, it's going to be in the dark area. You're going to see a lot more noise than you will if you were just baking a LUT on into the camera, 709 or YDR LUT, that's kind of giving you a finished look. It's giving you the raw data off the sensor with the idea of knowing that you're going to spend time. Feature films are all shot on whatever, if it's Canon, it'll be log 2. If it's Sony, if it's Arri, whatever product you're using, they're going to use whatever's going to give the most amount of dynamic range, because they've got time to go in and make every scene look the way they want to look. If they want to hold detail through windows behind them, or if they want to blow it out, that can all be handled in post, and the camera that gives you the most amount of dynamic range makes that easier. So log 3 is interesting, and it's my favorite log of the 3. There's like an urban legend, and I've been told it's true, that there was a lot of our cameras, because the Canon color is really good, and that is a strength of our cameras. We don't always have the most robust feature sets of a given product in a given price range, but I would put our color science up against anyone's in any price range. And so we get used in a lot of reality TV situations where they just need, where they may have, young kids fighting or something, and they may have, 3 or 4 or 5 cameras on that. They're developing a ton of data that they've got to go through and not just edit, but be able to then to color balance and color match. So the legend goes that there was a reality TV show that was using C300 Mark IIs, and they were, I think it was Photokin was doing the post, and they said, hey, it's costing us too much. They were shooting in log 2. And I said, in addition to being able to do a color pass, which we, worked into our estimate, we've got to do a noise pass. We've got to clean up some of the noise, because when you're getting that much data off the sensor, like I said, we're giving you not the raw data, but we're giving you a really we haven't doctored the footage or the color at all. We haven't added any of our secret sauce to it. So with the idea that you're going to do it in post. So it got back to Canon engineering, and this was early. This was right after the C300 release. So this was early in kind of the Cine EOS evolution, and it filtered up. Part of what my job does is, as a pro market rep, is to talk to professionals using our gear that are going to say, hey, why is this button here? Why isn't it here? Or feature sets like, why, I want to be able to do this and this at the same time. So a lot of what we do is we go out, talk to people, see how they're using the gear, report in, and in some cases advocate for change. You'll see a lot of stuff in different firmware updates that may or may not have come from kind of the field. And log 3 is a prime example of that. It got back to Canon. Engineers went out, talked to Photokin, and they got an idea of what they were looking for, went back, made some changes, gave a couple different options to Photokin, and whatever they pointed at and said, ooh, pretty, is what log 3 turned into. And basically what it is it's it gives you the exact same amount of highlight protection on the top end. So if you're shooting a bald guy backlit with sun behind him, or in a stage and his head's glowing, the exact same amount of protection for highlights. The gray area is moved up just a bit, but the black level is brought up, and you can see it here, at least 2 stops, because the black level is where you're going to get the noise on any camera. That's just science. So as the sensor exposes for black, it heats up, and that heat is what is making basically analog noise and adding noise to the file. So log 3 is a faster way to be able to still have the control to do a color grade in post, but not have to go through and do as deep of a color grade with the color pass. I can't remember. Yeah, go ahead.
I can attest. I have the XF705, and that we just shot this past week. We did shot 10 different videos one day, because we brought in Bart Yasso, who's part of Runner's World magazine, and he's bald as well. And it was a bright, muggy, sunny day, and yeah, I mean it.
Did you shoot log 2 or log 3?
Log 3.
Nice.
Yeah.
Like I said, that is and there is, with sensors, you can always count on, with every iteration of camera, there's a processor and a sensor, and as those get better, you're going to get a little more dynamic range, you're going to get a little more sharpness, you're going to get a little more fidelity. But the log is really just something that's going over that. So, you're using 705, that's the first camera that when I got in my hands, it made me want to go make a movie. It felt like I was holding an Aton. It felt cool. The 405 is great. It's the same optical block, same sensor, same lens, a little bit different functionality on how to focus and stuff. But there's something about the 705 that just is such a cool camera. The 1-inch sensor is a great compromise, because it's, you got a massive lens, you got a good amount of push on the lens, but having the color on the back end, being able to go in and being able to grade, and what are you using, Premiere or?
Yeah, I use Premiere.
Yeah, it seems like more and more people are just going to Premiere. In the beginning, it was kind of Resolve-y in the beginning, and I was a huge diehard Final Cut person up until I think it was it 6 when it changed. I mean, I had it down when I was teaching that. Students could call me, they could text me in the middle of the night, and I knew that so well. And when I went to Premiere, I was a little disappointed how the learning curve was a lot steeper coming from Final Cut to Premiere. But now I like it because I like the color control feels a lot more like Lightroom, which is great. I use Lightroom for everything. I mean, like, I think I could probably speak for most of us that photographers are ADD. You know, we're all, you know, trying to shield our eyes from squirrels just so we can get something done. And I love the color. I love being able to use Lightroom versus, you know, a slower, more deliberate workflow. And I feel like Premiere gives you that same kind of you know, if you shoot consistently and you know what you want to do with your files, it's really easy to manage the post process.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, oh, you're getting into it, but I mean, now most editing suites take all these different formats.
What were you shooting in?
XF, the HEVC. Yeah, the H.
Now that you can actually do something with it on the back end.
Right.
Now, how long have you had the camera? Did you have it before that was available in Premiere?
No, so this is just my company's camera that I started about 5 months ago, and really loving it. Usually shooting DSLR 8-bit 420 to get the 10-bit 422 really does make a difference. And with the HEVC, being able to compress it even further,
exactly,
so that you're not really taking up more space by shooting more information. Yeah.
Yep. And that's just processors getting faster. You know, when I explain it to people, or they don't, you know, not everyone, there's a lot of frustration with feature sets on still cameras versus camcorders and cine cameras. All of our cine cameras, all of our camcorders, they all have fans on them. They all, like, it's, you know, if you're doing something on your laptop and you're doing, you know, say you're in Excel, if you've got a massive spreadsheet, same as if you're in Lightroom or Photoshop and you throw a filter over a big file, you'll hear the computer spin up. You'll hear the fan kick on. That's the same thing that happens. It's just whenever you're asking the computer to do something, it has to work. But there's an active cooling system on computers, on cine cameras, not on the fine line is we're trying to make a product that a professional can use in the rain without having to carry, you know, a bunch of bags with them. Because ultimately the R5, the 1 series, those are designed for people to shoot pictures with. The fact that they do great video, is kind of a it's a benefit, but it's not the intended solution of the camera. I feel like there may be, and I don't know anything more than you know, reading Canon rumors, because they don't tell us a lot of stuff, but I feel like there may be a video-centric R camera coming. I could not be any happier with the C70, just for what it represents in terms of having a camera that kind of has the the feel of, it almost feels like a 1 series that's been pumped up a little bit. It's a little bit fatter. So ironically, my brother is a Steadicam operator in Hollywood. He shot Dexter for every season except the first season, and then he just came off of a full season of Grey's Anatomy. I couldn't watch it. It's too it's like a soap opera. But he doesn't like anything that's small that you hold in front of you. He just thinks the form factor is all wrong. And I, you know, coming from a still background, I love the Hasselblad, and I love being able to hold, you know, the C70 in your hand in front of you and have the whole camera there. So again, there's so much crossover between the two camera systems, going from just a mirrorless camera into a full-blown cine camera. And it's picking the right tool for the right job. You know, there's a lot of crossover. There are times when either will work, but then there's times when, you know, if you're a corporate shooter, there's a lot of corporate work here in Chicago. A lot of companies, like drug companies, usually they'll have their own internal like video department, because they're doing so much stuff. They don't want to bring people in and like corporate espionage or whatever. And so if you're shooting meetings that are going for 3 hours, you're not going to use a DSLR for that. It's not the right tool. So there's a lot of crossover in the middle, and it's I'm constantly amazed of how good the gear is getting. You know, we were talking about this before the call started, that it's just, the gear is getting so good that it's almost scary. So do we want to take these 3 questions, or I can also go out before we kind of talk more about the files formats. I've got a cool piece of video I can share with you guys. What do you want to do?
Yeah, let's open the floor to some questions. Let's get them in, see if you guys need anything clarified, anything at all. Drop it in the chat or the Q&A tab. We'll give them some time if you want to queue up that video for now.
Yeah, let me. So we're going to go into, and let me tell you what I'm going to show you, what we're looking at. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. So what we're looking at, this is actually a raw file. And I'm using a piece of software called Cinema Raw Development, which is basically the exact same piece of software that is inside of a camera. So this was shot at I'll show you everything about it. It was shot, it's clip and frame info. So this is not a new piece of footage, but we were at the C300 rollout in Hollywood. We were staying at the Lowe's Hotel right by Sunset. So we come out and there's this Lamborghini sitting against the black wall. So we're literally going to dinner. So camera's in tungsten. We roll it up to 6400 ISO. I'm going to talk about ISO in a little bit. It's the 50mm lens. It's not a great lens. It's the older, the 51.2. It's a good lens, but it was great when it came out on film. It was great with the 5D Mark II, but with better sensors, with higher megapixel rates, the lens is it doesn't hold up to a modern sensor. But that being said, it works quite well. So we come out, we're at 1.2, we're wide open. So there's this Lamborghini here, and we're like, what a great test for a car or for a new camera. Black car, black wall. So I'm going to roll a little bit of the footage, and I'm going to stop it at a certain point. We're a little bit jaggy just because I'm on an older computer, because I just got an M1 that is great, but not a lot of the software is working with it yet. So here's where I wanted to stop it though. Black car, black wall. These are LEDs behind it. So we're exposed. We're in Cinema Gamut, which I'm going to talk about the color settings in a sec. But what we don't tell you, it's kind of buried in one of the books, in one of the white papers. But what Cine Gamut does is it's a wider gamut, and coupled with, there's a camera setting, a preset setting called, I think it's called production camera. And what that is as close to the Alexa color space as we can get. Canon won't say that it's designed to match the Alexa, but we know that a lot of people are using a C200, C300 as a B camera or a C camera on an Airy shoot. And so we give you that color space to match it as close as possible. So we're in that color space now, wide color space, and this is Canon Log 2. So you can see we're getting detail into the radiator here. That's probably the closest to middle gray. That's as high as we have in color, but we're holding detail in every area, every part of that. It's kind of cool. But especially when we're rolling video, you can see that noise. And if you look in this area, in the darker areas of the file in here, that's where the noise goes. You kind of get the little marching ants in there, and that's the noise that PhotoKim said, hey, we need more money to do a color pass to fix that. So stop it somewhere where everything is sharp. Okay, so now we're going to go from Canon Log 2 to this is a smaller curve. And if you look, I'm going to toggle back and forth. But what you're seeing is the highlight protection is going to be identical. The midtones, that's as close to midtone as we have here. That's going to go up a little bit, but the dark areas have come up. And if you remember that chart a couple slides back, we're at least 2 stops difference in dynamic range from log 2 to log 3. So if we go from log 3 to log 2, you can see where that change in dynamic range is. I'm pointing to the screen if you guys can see me. you can see that that's in this area. Like in here, we're getting a little bit of detail underneath that front end that when you go to log 3, it's gone. But the highlights have changed, haven't changed at all. So between log 2 and log 3, that highlight's not, it's still there. So now I'm going to jump to 709. Now what 709 is, this is the broadcast standard. So when you, and we're just shooting, and like I said, we're cheating a little bit because I'm using a raw file, but this is the same as changing the color settings in the camera and recording straight from there. So if we go into 709, we're not changing the exposure at all. We've blown the highlights there. So in addition to having less dynamic range, where the dynamic range is has shifted on that grayscale. So if we were shooting this, if this were a live shot and we didn't have the luxury of lighting it to make it easier to shoot, your only option without using a log curve or something a little bit longer would be to stop down a little more and then bring the shadows up in post, which is not always an option if you need to turn your footage quickly. Now, Canon, the YDR setting is awesome. So YDR is the default color setting out of the camera. So if you buy a cine camera, 200 C70, I don't know if the camcorders, if this applies to the camcorders or not, but the
705, my 705 does have YDR.
Okay,
Yeah.
so YDR is like the secret sauce. So I just dropped it into YDR, and look what happened between 709 and YDR. The only thing that changed was the highlight protection, which is flipping awesome. So if you look in here, that doesn't change at all when I'm toggling. So the dark side and the gray side, even like here, this is what we're calling our middle gray part of the scene, is not changing at all. What YDR does is it just gives you, it's a little bit of basic highlight protection that almost like what you would get. It's not at, see, log 3, we're still getting more detail in there. We're getting a little bit of ribbing in there that you could pull out and post. We're losing that in YDR, but man, straight out of the camera, that is money in the bank. That is like one of the reasons I think that, like literally when I saw that, and like I said, I'm old. I'm in my 50s. I'm total product of the 80s, and I love just bright colors. I love contrast. To me, like YDR, I would jack the contrast up even a little bit more, but holding on to the highlights, just because I had that beaten into me for so long. In printing and doing transparencies when I was in school, and when I was at Harrington, that was like we beat that into our students, how do you have to protect the highlights at every expense. So it's really a cool way to look. So again, there's log 2. That is if you're going to go out and you're going to do a color grade. This is giving the colorist the most amount of data that is possible. We're still holding all that data or all the detail inside of the
now does this operate more like a log curve? So you're still whatever, you know, if you're at 422 10-bit or 420 8-bit, that's what's justifying how much data is being saved on your card, not the difference between
what the log does. What the log does, it's the same amount of data, the same measurable amount of data. So if you were thinking of it not in activated pixels that were being recorded, but if you were, in like a table full of Dixie cups, the amount of water that you're holding is the same. What the log curve does is it redistributes inside of the Dmax, which is more of a cine term, which is more just the absolute, the density of the film and the highlights being blown out. So what the log curve does is it takes that distance in between the most, white without detail and black without detail, and it redistributes to put the same, you had the same amount of tonality, but it's pushing more towards the dark side and the high side to hold those in. So if you were really wanting to pixel peep, where you would probably see a difference if we were to pull out a scale, when we looked at those black and white, kind of just the little 8-bit and the 10-bit verticals, would the 10-bit vertical, if that went one more over to 12 and had even more a smoother tonality, some of that middle tonality would disappear in light of keeping the holding the detail on the highlight and the shadow side. So you're not grabbing more data with the log by putting a log curve over your footage.
Right.
All that is determined by what, if you're an XF AVC, if you're an MP4, that's the only thing that will determine the volume of data that you're recording, the log curve. And there are other curves that are not log, there's, you can, and it's just a LUT, and LUT is short for lookup table. So you could have, a TV show that might, better example, a lot of TV stations will have a Canon or Sony or some full-size camera with like a Super 35 sensor for when they sell for their creative services. So say you own a tire store or a mattress store, and the local TV station says, hey, you should advertise on TV. This is what we can do for you. And they say, well, I can't afford a TV commercial. And they say, well, if you buy the ad space, we'll produce a commercial for you. So they'll have a C300 that they'll shoot that because they can make it look drastically different than what they're getting on their Sony or their Ikegami or their Grass Valley broadcast camera. So by being able to control and get more into the fine tonality of the image, it gives you more of that cinematic look. And I don't like the phrase cinematic because it's so broad. It's like, oh, everyone with the DSLR is now like they're doing cinematic pictures, but really you can use a DSLR poorly just like you can a cine camera. It's not really I think more than anything the phrase cinematic denotes the ability to control depth of field more so than it does anything with dynamic range. I'm gonna take a sip of water real quick.
Yeah, so pretty much you're just benefiting more from using a log file if you're using a higher bit depth. And
exactly,
right,
because you're getting more data to go in and use in post-production. You're getting a wider palette. You're getting a better distribution of tonality across. So if we go back to, like I said, I wish I had that better slide. I couldn't find a modern one. The only ones that I could find were like Canon approved, that showed the log curve. It kind of showed the distribution of how it was taking this tonality in the middle. And this isn't even a full, like what it should be, like black, 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 all the way up to white, white, white. But it's it's putting more steps in the top side and the bottom side, just to keep the file together. So you've got more to work with.
Right. And you see it in the waveform as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know what's funny? Okay, I'm going to jump ahead only because you said waveform. I'm going to go way ahead, and then we're going to come back to these last couple slides. We're almost done anyway. Okay, I don't have the waveform stuff in here. So here's what I'm going to tell you on exposure. So, and this is different. This is Canon unique. So if you've got access to, you know how to pull up the waveform and look at it, this is a really cool thing that I didn't understand until someone showed me on a waveform monitor, because I'm just as visual as everyone else. I need to see it. I can read it 20 times and it won't make sense. But what Canon does, and like I said, I don't know how Nikon does it, how Sony does it, how Fuji does it. Fuji color I feel like is the most Canon-like color. But when you're looking at exposure, and we're going to talk a little bit about cinema exposure as well, but specifically in the still cameras, when you're at the full stops, you don't gain. So if you're, again, this is turning into like an AARP meeting. If you're old, you're used to saying, I'm going to use 400 speed film and I'm going to push it 2/3 of a stop. And every time you pushed it 1/3, 2/3, or a full stop, that was at the cost of getting more noise. So you didn't push only if you absolutely had to. So now everyone has a set, the camera has like a default or a color or a speed that's recommended. Still cameras is 100. So what I want you guys to know and play with this, but there is no benefit to using the split stops on a Canon camera if you're only trying to save noise. So what I mean by that, so let's say just we're at 800 because it's nice in the middle of the scale. So however your image looks at 800, just in terms of noise, is going to be identical at 640 and at 500. Same goes with 1600 at 1250 and at 1000, they're the same. What Canon does is we hit the process. Here I go, pointing at the screen again. We hit the sensor with more voltage at the full stops. So we're actually jacking up the power going into the sensor, so it's more sensitive to light at every full stop. The third stops, we're just turning up the gain. Actually, we're turning down the gain. From 1600, we're turning down the gain here, and we're turning down the gain here. So if you're the only reason on a Canon camera to use split stops, still cameras, you can decide between thirds or halves. Cine cameras, I think, are all thirds. The only reason to do that is if you're lighting something and you just need to do that because of the scene you're lighting. So there's no benefit, there's no loss in going, like, if you're going to go, if you think, oh God, I need a little more light, my C300 Mark II, the recommended ISO is 800. I don't want to go all the way up to 1600. The reality is, once you go to 1000, you can go to 1250 or 1600, and you're not going to gain any more noise until you go to the next third stop over that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Now, how does that work with some of these? I don't know if Canon has them. I know Sony has the dual gain.
So dual
sensor.
gain, it depends on how you do it. That's a freaking awesome question. So the two, and we don't have it in any of the still cameras, but in the video cameras, we do have the dual gain output on the C70 and the C300 Mark II, both phenomenal sensors. Those are probably the best cine sensors we've ever made. So what it does, there's another manufacturer that does something similar. I don't think I can technically say it because it's kind of like Red. We can't, there's something with Red, and I can't remember what it is that we can't say, that like they like patented a word or something, but there's a manufacturer that rhymes with Canawanic. How's that? And they've got a cine camera and they've got a dual gain output. And what they do with theirs is they're giving you a base ISO of 800, and I think a secondary of 32 or 64. And so they're using their dual gain output to increase the dynamic, the dynamic range of the camera, with the idea that in post you can go in the shadow area and pull from this set of the stream that was exposed at 6400 versus this, so you can get into that shadow area. What Canon does is totally different. So all we're doing is, as the processor, here I'm going to come off so you can look at my hands. So as the sensor is exposed, we cache, so the signal comes out and it gets split. It gets duplicated and split. So we make a copy of it. One of it goes into basically into a cache, into a little storage, into a notebook. So we write down some stuff on your data. We put some of it on the desktop, and the other stuff goes to the typewriter. That's a really bad example. We're just going to use cameras. So sensor gets activated. We split the signal. One of it goes into the cache. One goes straight to the processor, just for like a millionth of a second. Then the cache signal goes in and gets reprocessed at a higher ISO. So all we're doing it's similar to what the other manufacturer's doing, but instead of increasing the amount of dynamic range, we're processing out the second file and hitting a noise pass on it to clean our blacks up. So when you're using C300 or C70 or C300 Mark III, these are the only two cameras that Canon makes that does this. The blacks are going to be cleaner than like a C500 Mark III or Mark II at those same frame rate, at the same ISO. So you could be at ISO 3200, and between those two cameras, you're going to be able to see a better, cleaner black on the 70 and the 300 Mark II by the way we're reprocessing the signal to give you a cleaner black. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so does that affect sharpness at all when you're doing that noise pass?
It doesn't, because we're only doing it on the black side. So
Okay.
I guess it does. If you were to go back, like on that Lambo, if you were to go back and look at, compare the, like the radiator that was in the shadow, and basically what it would do is like, it would give you the ability to use maybe the wide DR, or, you know, and just get a cleaner file straight out of the camera. Cause you can go in and do it in post, but being able to get it straight out of the camera that clean just makes it that much better.
Yeah.
Especially if you're doing documentary, if you're doing stuff where you're not, you know, a lot of our cameras were not, you know, the cinematic, you know, a lot of people make independent movies, but we're not the, you know, the choice of, you know, Arri owns that market. They make beautiful cameras. The color science on that, and that's a 12-year-old sensor. I just found that out. Their sensor is 12 years old. It's like, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But I was shocked to find that, to learn that the Arri, what's in the Alexa now, is really part of that. It was designed almost 15 years ago, 10 years ago.
So we got a question coming
yeah.
in, and they're asking, is there any difference between C-Log 1, 2, and 3 on DSLRs like the R5 and 1DX Mark III versus the cinema cameras like the C7?
If you're matching in post,
because he's getting a C70 as a main camera, and
Yep.
he would love to use his R5 as a D cam. So is there gonna be an issue?
No. So here's the thing with the R5. The internal log is only an 8-bit log. So if you send to a recorder on your R5, that's a 10-bit log. So those will match perfectly. If you don't want to send out to a recorder and you're doing stuff that you don't want to spend a lot of time doing post, ideally you would wait a minute. Let me look at something. You may not be able to do what I'm about to tell you to do. I don't think the C70 has straight log. So let me get out of here real quick and go back to me. Wait, where did I go? Did I just hang up on you guys? Nope, there. That happened earlier during the test. So the only thing you got to really watch for is if it's an 8-bit or 10-bit log. So the C70 has log 2 and log 3, but does not have log 1. If you're using a C300, you can use the original log. There's also you know what you can do though? No, there's a way to do it.
Because he's using R5, hopefully, for his B camera.
If so the R5 will give you, if it's R5 and C70, yeah, just you got to send it to a recorder, and then you'll get a 10-bit internal log.
So it may just start become blocky or breaking up and artifacty on the R5 compared to the C70, because that log curve is being applied to 8-bit instead of a 10-bit. Yeah, less color information. And
the C70 is one of the 2 cameras that we do the dual gain output on. So that is one of the cleanest cameras. That sensor is gorgeous. The C70 is like, to me, it's like burn everything else. And I never wanted the 28-70, and they finally sent me one as a demo. It's a gorgeous lens, but I'm old.
You're talking about the RF mount version?
The RF, yeah, the RF. We make a 28-70. This is an F2, but it's huge. It's massive. Here it is. So I'm like, yeah, that's nice, but that's, you know, I don't want to carry this around. But on the R, it is a little bit big, but on the C70, it's like a perfect fit. So you've got like a nice full range zoom that is it's a straight F2 that is as sharp as primes through the whole zoom range. It is absolutely gorgeous. It's heavy. It's like I think $1,000 a pound. It's almost 3 pounds. And the lens is, I think, $29.99. But it's if you're in a major city and you can rent it and try it, it's pretty remarkable. But that's a great question. There is also, on that same line of questioning, if you're pretty generic with any cameras, any Canon cameras at least, there's a setting. When I was saying that there's the one setting called production camera, and that's going to mimic as close as we can to the Arri LUT. So if you're editing, you're going to be able to get closer. And the R5 was used on Grey's Anatomy in 3 shots this last season, and the colorists like it. They called over and they said, hey, this is better, because they'd used both Panasonic and Sony for inserts where they needed a small camera, and this was the first time that they We got a R5 to my brother and they used it in 2 shots and the colorist loved it. So it does cut really well with Airflex, which is nice. And I just lost my train of thought. Oh no, color space. So there's a color setting called EOS camera or EOS still camera on the C100 Mark II, the C300 Mark II and 3 called, I think it's just called EOS still camera or EOS camera. And what that's going to do, that will dumb down and match the 8-bit log that you're getting out of a still camera. So the best way to do that, unfortunately, is if you are in an area with the 70 and the R5, you're gonna be way up here. It's gonna be gorgeous. But if you are in a situation where maybe you've got a C300 Mark II and you're using like a 5D4 with log, the best way to get it to match perfectly, if you don't want to mess with it, is to bring the output of the 300 down to the 5D4's level, which is, you got to bring that down to an 8-bit, just the straight log and then EOS output, and that'll match it pretty well. It's kind of sucks to take, you know, we're taking a $12,000 camera and dumbing it down to a $3,000 camera, so to make it faster for the to match in post, but that's just the best way to do it. You can do it the other way. You're just going to spend more time working on the 5D file to get it up to that. But the nice thing is with the R series is we're now giving you a 10-bit file out of the camera, which is really, really nice. Okay, let me get back to, if you notice, I digress. Share screen. I'm going to finish this real quick because there's another thing I want to tell you about, which is kind of cool. Again, like the like this, these are the little nuggets that I love. Like when you find out, like, oh, 640 isn't really any different than 1,000 or 12, you know, that you can do that. So one thing, when you get the native the native ISO on any camera, so all cameras, regardless of manufacturer, they're going to give you a native ISO. So this first slide we're looking at, the native ISO is 850. This is most likely the C100 because it's an 8-bit camera. When you go to the 10-bit cameras, the native ISO is 800. And so what you're getting, and depending on how you're shooting, if you're in a commercial studio, if you're at a college and you're doing like in-house video where you're lighting everything, you've got some flexibility if you know where to do it and what you're looking at. So let's go to the current one. This is the most modern. So this will be C300 ISO, and then this will also, I'm not 100% positive, but it should be identical for the C70. So looking at the ISO of 800, the base ISO or the native ISO is what we're calling it. You're getting a full 10 stops on the shadow side and 6.3 stops on the highlight side. So going down is going to give you a cleaner file. So the native ISO isn't always the cleanest file that comes out of the camera. So it's a compromise. Again, it's like everything in photography, it's a compromise. So where the native ISO is we're giving you the cleanest file with the widest amount of dynamic range. So as you go down to ISO 400, you're like, you know what? It's bright and sunny and I got gum stuck on the internal ND button. And so we're just going to run the ISO down to 100 because it's bright, sunny, and the ISO, the internal ND filters are broken. So here's what's going to happen to your file. Yeah, you're at 6 dB, minus 6 dB gain. But look at how much overhead you just blew on your highlights. You lost, and these are stops. So this isn't twice as much. This is dynamic. Let's just round to 3 stops up to 6 stops. You've just lost a dramatic amount of overhead protection on the high end. You pick up a little bit, 11 into the shadow area, but that's what's happening as you go down. As you go up, and obviously it gets better. Most people aren't going to be at these extremes. I keep pushing to have like an ISO like 10 or a 25 on the camera if you're doing time lapse. just so you don't have to stack up. You know, almost every single reality TV show, they'll have a building with the sky with clouds blurring over it high noon, just for a transition. If you were able to have like an ISO 3, like old litho film, where you can just stick it in there, where you can just have that. And even though, and Canon, I mean, the engineering side of Canon, and we're very conservative. That's why I think I said earlier, we do not have, you know, and when you look at products on certain price ranges and you look across other manufacturers, oftentimes, more often than not, we're going to not have the most robust feature set. Other manufacturers at that same price range may give you more features, because Canon, if anything is going to affect picture quality, they're not going to take that decision. Some of the early cameras made by Sony, with that, where you can go all the way to 120 slow-mo on a button. If you look at the footage, you lose dynamic range big time. If you're like someone's running and they jump, and all of a sudden you lose some dynamic range. But I've talked to people that were, you know, shooting for NFL or ESPN, and they're saying, you know, if they're doing the little bumper, the little 2-minute bumper of the quarterback at home, and he's walking on the beach with his kid and he throws his kid up in the air, and you just need a couple seconds of slow-mo, most people aren't going to go, oh, look, did you see the dynamic range went down when he threw his kid in the air? But Canon doesn't want to give, and we put, at any opportunity for a decision to be made, we'll always take the path to give you the very best image quality. And I think that shows in a lot of the why we're so prevalent on sets of reality TV. There's 4K cameras out there that are much cheaper than ours. But if you're rolling 3 cameras on, you know, for 8 hours a day, that's a staggering amount of post-production. And if you have a camera that gives you something that's usable out of the camera versus a camera that needs a little bit of work on it, and it's a trade-off. I was talking to a guy at a student who was like, he's all hot and bothered to get the Blackmagic. And for him, it was perfect. And for me working for Canon, it was perfect for him to buy that, because the trade-off, on paper, it looks great, but he's going to spend more time on post. But he had the time. If you've got deadlines, or you're a commercial studio and you're turning stuff as fast as you can, that's where the decision is made, where you want to spend the money. So not unlike kind of Canon in our whole what's the word I'm looking for? The whole global view, or just the kind of the overall view of how we look at things. This is a really cool thing to be aware of, just what happens when you run up and down ISO. You'll notice as you go up, you don't lose anything in terms of dynamic range on an 8-bit camera, or you lose a little bit on the shadow side of a 10-bit camera. But what you're really picking up is noise. And you're either, picking up noise on there, or that's the drawback. But as you go down from that native ISO, that's what you're getting. And every camera will have this, and it's just a matter of finding out where it is. So where I was saying earlier, if you're lighting everything, this may not be, if you're a TV studio, you can light that and be fine. But if you're a run and gun documentary, or you're shooting weddings, having the difference between 3-stop overhead on your highlights and 6-stop is massive. So, and these charts are available not just in log, but on everything. So it's kind of cool to dig into, to look at where the camera is doing what. And when they say, here's the native ISO, what does that really mean? There are times when it's fine, it's kind of cool. So what else did I miss? Just talking about the actual formats. ProRes is the only camera that we have that writes ProRes is the C700 full frame and the C700 Super 35. And I think the global shutter version, but there's only a couple of those actually floating around in the world. But the C700 full frame is ProRes internal. And then on C300, I know that's a super popular codec, but you have to pay a site license on every piece that is sold, and Canon's decided not to do that. So the workaround is just to use an external recorder, get like a Ninja or something that will record ProRes. And then you look at where you've got a little more flexibility with lower and the 8-bit files versus going up to the 10-bit files where you need a little more robust. Generally, the XF AVC, the MP4 files, optically, they're going to be pretty darn close, but audio, you take a hit in more compression on MP4 versus the MPEG files. And then the motion JPEG is a ridiculous format, highly recommended not to use. And that's more for like the 1DX Mark II wrote in that, and that is literally making a string of JPEGs, but it's huge. It's not usable. You're shooting, I don't know what the data rate is, but it's only doing that to keep the camera from overheating because it doesn't have to do the math to compress it down. So it's a you know, it's good for little short blurbs, but you're not going to go out and shoot a film on it. Cameras and what has what recording formats? Where has log? There we go. I think we are. Damn.
All righty, cool.
Has ended. What questions do you guys have?
Yeah, send them in. Send them in the chat or in the Q&A tab. Send them our way. There's no question we cannot tackle here. So how far along are we in terms of seeing higher bit rates on DSLRs with, you know, newer, you know, CFast express cards and stuff like that?
We're getting there. And that's why I was stammering a little bit. I want to double check the R5. I know you can get 10-bit into a recorder. I can't remember on the 5 if I'm confusing the R and the R5, because I think the R will give you an extra 2-bit out to the recorder, and I can't remember. There is a difference in the internal settings. And I don't have my camera in front of me. But you nailed it. The reason why we don't have higher bit rates is, you know, the DSLRs tend to be weather sealed cameras that are designed to be cameras first, video second. So you know, like I said, the R5 is already giving you a clean 10-bit output, which is the first camera that we had. You know what? I'm gonna look up something real quick.
And it's about balancing how much heat sinks can we put into this camera without ruining the form factor.
Yep.
And also,
because there was a camera that we came out that was super popular.
So is there what is the demand on the processor, on the camera end of things also that affects, you know, battery life for switching from 8-bit to 10-bit, or, you know, 420 to 422? Is it minimal, or is it?
No, it's there. It's definitely, it's measurable. Because what it is too, like the overheat problem on the R5 really comes down more to the card heating up than it does. And there are, you know, there are stopgaps in there. If there's an opportunity, like Canon will never let a camera go into anywhere where, so as a camera overheats, it's going to start getting noisier in the dark areas. So we're going to turn that off before that happens. And it sucks, and some people hate it, but that's the reality of it. Canon is going to put it, like I said, if there's a crossroads and there's an opportunity to downgrade the video file or the still file or not, we're always going to take that, always, 100% of the time. And it's a valid argument. Red, when I was hired, one of the guys, my boss, came from Red, and he was like, don't care, you know, if you want to run your camera and do X, Y, and Z to it, it's going to suck, but you bought it, you can do whatever you want with it. Where Canon is like, no, we don't want to, you know, we didn't have interchangeable mounts on our cameras until this round, because Canon, the engineering side, was worried that, well, what if someone doesn't shim the lens properly? They're going to shoot footage and it's going to be all out of focus. Like, whoa, Red's been doing it forever. If you don't shin lens properly, yep, your footage is all out of focus, and they don't care. And there's something to be said for that. And that's, like I said, I think part of the reason why we're seeing a lot more video centric features in DSLRs is because of the push for it. You know, people want it, they want to be able to use, they don't want to have to go out, you know, with a, you know, $7,000 camera if they've already got a $3,000 camera that can do, you know, you don't need that $7,000 camera if you're doing a, you know, a 2-minute blurb for Instagram. You don't. And that's just the reality of it, you know, that if you're going to make a feature film, the $7,000 camera has a lot more to offer than a DSLR. So a lot of, I think, is just us kind of pushing back and you know, and being able to go out and cite examples where there's, you know, there's need for it, where I think Canon will, you know, we finally have on the C70 vertical video. And you talk to anyone that's, you know, a real cinematographer, they think vertical video is the bane of their existence. But the reality is, in Chicago, there's a lot of people that are getting paid to shoot branded video for social platforms. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And so, you know, if we put let you spin the, I've got pictures from a guy here in town that would send me whenever he had to shoot for a client, and they would literally put either tape or string over the monitor, because the client, you can't tell the client, no, it'll be cropped. They can't, like, they can't think like that. So they would actually have to black out the monitor for the client. And every time he did it, he would send it to me, and I would send it, write up a report, send it in. And now finally, the R series, you can crop vertical, it'll black it out. So if you're doing video, you can, you know, it's stuff like that needs to, you know, just, we need to keep hearing it across. And for some reason, the engineers, and I guess like anything, you know, if we can cite an example and say, you know, here's this person, he works for a major university, they've got, you know, 5 people full-time shooting, you know, medical procedures in hospital rooms, and they need to be able to do X, Y, or Z. That helps, instead of us going, hey, wouldn't it be a good idea to do this? I still want, I don't know if you remember the old F1 Canon would have, if you wanted, I think it was auto, you had to add the motor drive to get some auto features, and then you had to add the finder to get auto features. And I would love, instead of having a top mounted, like a proper XLR adapter, normally it just goes, it goes on the hot shoe. I think Panasonic's got them, Sony's got them. I would love to have a grip that goes on the bottom that would have a proper, even if it just had one XLR adapter, and then a proper knob. So while you're recording, you can actually turn the knob up or down, stuff like that. I put that in like 20 times. So I doubt they're going to do it, but it makes the camera easier to hold. If you keep mounting stuff on the top, on a lot of my cameras, it's funny. Okay, here's the C70. The Canon top handle is not on. My C300 is sitting here, no top handle. C100 Mark II, but this is a stupid crazy combo too. The 17 to 55 2.8, it's an old lens. We don't even make it anymore, but it's stabilized. So on the C100 Mark II with the 17 to 55, you get this great little run and gun camera with the equivalent of a 24 to 70 that's stabilized, the straight 2.8 through the whole range. It's such, if you just need HD, this is still, it'll run all day long. It's 420 8-bit. But another thing too is just test. You know, I would put our 8-bit file up against some manufacturer's 10-bit file, hands down, any day of the week. We're not always going to win, but there are times when we're going to win. And it's just, you know, don't get hung up on, oh, this is a, you know, this won't give you 4K 444, but beautiful color right out of the camera, small battery run all day. If you're, you know, family birthday party, something like that, you want to do video, it's a fantastic solution. And it's got proper, so what I was saying earlier, like with the proper XLR adapters, I don't like the top handle. The camera gets so much heavier on the top. The C70, C70 and C200 are the first cameras that have the XLR adapters built onto the body. So you don't have to have, if you want to run without the top handle, you're not sacrificing losing your XLR adapter.
Awesome. And if there are no more other questions, I'll give it a couple seconds. I just want to talk a little bit about the series and PPA. First off, thank you, Dirk, for doing this. This is great. I know I don't read the manual, and nobody does, and that's why you're here.
Until they get in trouble.
Exactly. Then it's like, well, why didn't you know that? You should have known that. But yeah, we NPPA, and all our members really appreciate you doing this, and some really great information, very detailed information that help inform our shooting and inform, make us better storytellers in the
Absolutely.
end.
Which is the goal.
Yeah. And so if you're not an NPPA member, go ahead to the website. If you pay $50, it's just $75 to be an NPPA member. You get access to all of these sessions, previous sessions, be able to register for future sessions for as long as this series continues. And, if you have a camera that you're looking at buying, we probably, and it's a fairly newer camera, we probably already have a session. So go to nppa.org and then go to the events tab and click on Master Your Gear Canon, and you'll be able to register for new events and also see all the previous sessions. So thank you, Dirk. And as always, thank you guys for joining, and I hope you guys have a great night.